Mrs. Council General, dear TOSED members, dear guests, on behalf of myself and my organization, TOBB, welcome. I would like and thank you all for being here tonight, especially to Mr. Abruzzini for accepting our invitation to share his valuable ideas on this matter, which is very important for business community. Arnaldo, io posso dire in italiano grazie mille per aver accettato di parlare di noi stasera. Grazie mille. I think it will be very interesting meeting for all of us. So I leave the floor to President of TOSED, Melih. Thank you very much for your coming today, and I say again, welcome, hoş geldiniz.
Mrs. Consul General, dear members, dear guests, dear friends, thank you for being here tonight with us for this event. I welcome all of you. When choosing tonight's topic, we paid utmost attention to have an interesting and controversial subject. At the end, we have unanimously agreed that the international trading business would be a very interesting topic. You will hear more about this topic in an instant. For tonight's subject, we have a very distinguished guest among us. I am proud to announce our guest speaker, Mr. Arnaldo Abruzzini, CEO of EUROCHAMBRES. Mr. Abruzzini, you are warmly welcome among us, and I would like to present you my sincere thanks for accepting to be our guest speaker tonight. Mr. Abruzzini is not only the CEO of a very big European organization to which 43 countries are members, but also a very successful businessman. However, I do not wish to continue any further introducing Mr. Abruzzini, because I would like to leave this job to Mr. Haluk Nuray, who is not only our board member, but also a very close friend of Mr. Abruzzini. He will tell us more about tonight's guest speaker and the topic itself. The floor is yours, Haluk.
Thank you, Melih. This time, the shift cycle started to be completed in the lifespan of a human being, and that makes the global change meaningful on personal level, meaningful for individuals, and scary also. All countries, from small to big, from Malta to China, all systems, from education to pension, all values, from personal and public welfare to human rights and rule of law, all structures, from companies to governments, we are living in Turkey, and even individuals under pressure. We are all in need of reviewing, scrutinizing, and reforming ourselves. At personal level, he is also a winner. He is fighting with time and winning. Believe me, this guy is looking exactly the same. I first met him 25 years ago. He's not changing, I don't know. He's not only surviving, he's beating the change. So, but this party doesn't give the same. Maybe if he misses too much at the end of his speech, he may say a few words about it. But believe me, he's the perfect speaker for talking about change. Arnaldo, the floor is yours. Let me stop it.
This is the first time that I experienced such an introduction, and I thank you very much for that. I mean, it made me thinking about many things. It is a great pleasure for me to share with you today some thoughts about changes. Yeah, certainly. That is a key word of today. But changes, as you are saying, have occurred all over our history of human being on this planet. Certainly, if we look at history from a very focused perspective, we can say that today is a time where major changes are occurring. But actually, if we widen a little bit our perspective, major changes happened in the past with a much higher impact on society than today. But we are very much concerned about today, because many say, yeah, but at the end of the day, who cares about yesterday? We care about today. So today, all these changes produce fear, as we said, and resilience to change. Actually, even us, we are changing, besides the nice wording of Haluk on my appearance, but we are changing every day. And we are changing not only because we are aging, because that is a normal change that you will accept, but we are changing from our genetic perspective as human beings every day. We don't perceive it, because genetic changes take a long time to appear. But the change is happening every day. Now, why this is so important to consider? Because whatever we do, and the way we act in society should embed always this thinking that things are changing, are, somebody say, evolving. The pessimistic say they are becoming worse, but change is there. And look at what is happening also in our society today when we talk about technological development. It's a big change. It's a behavioral change, because being exposed to technological developments, it means that we will be acting differently for achieving the same results. Consider the fourth industrial revolution, the Industry 4.0, which today is the big element of change in our industrial society. But actually, that is something that has an enormous impact in our life. But we take it for the good and for the bad. For the good, because we will all experience some additional devices or ways of doing things that would facilitate our life. Consider 20 years ago, this wasn't existing. Now we all have one of these in our pockets. And this is for the good. But then there are also some negative elements of this change that we are fighting against, which is, for instance, producing this kind of stuff will at the end result in a labor market which is completely different. Because those that are not up and upskilled to produce these things will be pushed out of the market. Therefore, we increase potentially unemployment and therefore societal tensions that could end up with a sort of revolutionary approach against our institutions. This is what we call today populist movement. We should consider. And I would like to address this from three different perspectives. There is a perspective of business, there is a perspective of society, and there is a perspective of individuals. If you take from the business perspective, what we have witnessed in the past decades has transformed completely the way a fraction of the business community is conducting business. A fraction. We have always been, for 100,000 years, hunters and gatherers, human beings. 100,000 of years. In the past 200 years, against 100,000 of years, something has changed. Something has changed for a fraction of the business community. Because still, there are a majority of the businesses that are conducting their business as it was conducted 100 years ago. those that have changed the way of conducting business had an enormous impact in our life. Because we are talking about discoveries, new technologies that now we consider normal, but 100 years ago it was not normal, for the 100,000 years ago were not existing. Just consider a health factor. We enjoy today a quality of life and a length of life that was unimaginable just some years ago, some generations ago. The curve of the life expectations has peaked in the past 100 years. Before, for 100,000 years, it was always flat. And then something has happened. This is for the good. And we should always consider that in the evolutionary theory, there is always a good part of it. Sometimes we tend to forget it, right? We focus on the bad. But there's always a good. Why? Because nature has been able to produce procedures, processes of adaptation. The evolutionary theory could be translated also as adaptation theory. We adapt to conditions. And that makes that we are changing in an evolutionary way. Business have done the same. They have adapted to new conditions. And those that have been able to change, they have been able to survive and to develop. I want just to remind you the history of this. This, 20 years ago, was a different device. Was a Nokia 3110. You all remember that. Nokia was an extremely successful business with the best engineers for that time, investing an enormous percentage of their turnover in research. All of a sudden, something has happened. A change, a disruptive change. Somebody came up with a device that was not very similar to the Nokia. And Nokia resisted to the change, pretending to say that their technology will win. We all know what has happened to Nokia. Now, somebody could still use a vintage Nokia telephone, but just for fun. But this shows that even in business, the resistance to change can cause dramatic damages. We can't resist the change. We were discussing before with some of you the movement of people. That also has always been there. Since when 250,000 years ago, a group of human beings from Africa decided to move in other continents. And since then, we've been moving. And we've been moving, and thanks God we were moving. Because we were moving, conquering the Earth, the planet, making the Earth a more easy to live in planet. And we have been also able, through connection and marriages and sexual appeals between those communities, to create the genetic part that we have today, which is much more resilient to problems that we were 100,000 years ago. Thanks God we did it. And now we have somebody that says, no, we have to stop all this, we can't move. We have to born in a country with our co-citizens and remains as this forever. could it be? This is even worse than Nokia. So the element for business is translated also in element for society. Society are changing. The observation of the United States of America. Now they have a president that pretend that nothing has to move. We are what we are and we want to remain what we are. But nobody told him that in the past 30 years, American society has dramatically changed. Thanks to those people that now he want to block at the frontier with Mexico. Those people today, or the generation before of those people today, made a huge change in American society. And they are those that make the American machine working. If you have experience to go to the US in recent days, you know that landing at the airport or entering in a hospital or going to a restaurant, it would be much easier to make an order or to place a request if you are a Spanish-speaking person. They all speak Spanish. And as I was saying, I have some friends that work in the education sector in the US. They are in troubles because they do not find Spanish speakers, teachers for elementary grade. Because the parents of those people, they require that at school there is not only English or American language taught, but also Spanish. And they don't find them. So societies are changing so rapidly compared to the pace that they've been changing the past 100,000 years today. And we need to consider that probably we should bear in mind when we make policies, education policies. This is something, is one of my preferred subjects actually, because if you talk to teachers, you find very excellent teachers as well. But there is a bulk of the teachers that believe that they can continue to teach pupils exactly what they were teaching 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. What kind of society are we creating tomorrow? If those people that will eventually be our leaders do not have embedded in their brain the path of change they're exposed to. By the way, we see some results today in our leadership too. I can talk about my country of origin. It's dramatic. People do not want to realize that either we are following or surfing the wave of the change of our society, or we are not apt to govern the country because we can create damages, blocking the flow. Just imagine that on a highway where cars go fast enough, you put a light, red, what will happen? People start braking and then probably accidents everywhere. Well, this is what these people is causing to our countries. If they do not realize that they cannot stop something which is inevitable, and it is out of their control. What they can do, they can facilitate certain elements. And individuals, what is, according to your ideas, the role of politics? My idea is politics is there to make sure that collectively we all live at the best of our possibilities. That collectively we grant options of a better life to all. The center of the politics is the human being, is the individual. It's not the business. And I'm managing a business organization. I'm not the center of the politics. Politics is there for a different purpose. And if you take that and you bear in mind when you make policies that the center of your action is the human being, you are not very far from believing, as I do, that we do need what I can call a new humanism. The humanism, when it was in power, believed that the human being was the center of the world. Then we have decided to make some shift in our believings, and we have lost the centrality of the human beings. I do believe that today we need to recover a new humanism, putting back the human being at the center of our policy and our actions, even in business. Business is there because serves needs of society. The initial form of business, when the starting element of a business society were just at the very beginning. The entrepreneurs were those people able to detect a need and to provide solution to that need. Imagine the agricultural business at the very beginning of some 1,000 years ago. What was that? I was able to crop more than my needs and to offer that more to somebody else, again something that I didn't have. So the center of the action was the human being. Paradoxally, today, if you look at the most successful business, global business around the world, take Facebook or Amazon, their focus is the individual. And they are able to be so successful because they are able to satisfy certain kind of needs of the individuals. Therefore, if we could recover the centrality of the human being, we could also understand differently what or how organized elements of our society could act, like business, corporate social responsibility. I hate it. Why I hate it? The purpose is laudable, but the way it is conducted, it doesn't put the human being at the center. Why? Because if you take a financial statement of a company, corporate social responsibility is below the line. You report below the line under the non-financial activities. Just imagine how different our society will be if, as a business community, we will put corporate social responsibility above the line. That would mean putting back the human being at the center of our activity, not just as marketing or a result activities to lift our face in a certain way. And this is true for that fraction of business that can afford it, because still there are a lot of businesses that put human beings at the center of their activity, but they are less visible. And I'm not talking about NGOs or charity organizations, I'm talking about normal business. That is where I think we should recover our values, our ethical perspective. And that is a challenge we have these days in Brussels. Just try to put in perspective what I'm talking about and combine with the election next year in May of the European Parliament. The lack of understanding about these issues has created an enormous tension in our societies about the values and the need of Europe. Why? Because the major concern is Europe does not care about me. On the contrary, they're doing something against my benefit. Therefore, I want somebody that would defend me from those people. I want to vote for somebody that would make walls against Brussels. What will happen if 26th of May next year we will have a consistent group, not even the majority of the European Parliament, made by those people that believe that whatever we are doing at European level is an obstacle to their happiness. That everything that we have been achieved so far will be swept off in a fraction of a second. If we are not able to convince people that Europe, it is not a bunch of bureaucrats in Brussels, but is made by people able and capable to work and act consistently for the benefit of our co-citizens, I will give right to those that say, oh, forget it, I'll vote for somebody that will stop Brussels. That is our responsibility. We cannot claim anybody else that what is happening, it is not our fault or our responsibility. Forget about Brexit. Brexit is peanuts compared to that risk. Forget about Trump. It will pass away in a few years. Forget about China. That we say, okay, I agree, but still we can work with them. But if in Europe we don't succeed in getting the message through that what we are doing is for the benefit of our citizens, individually speaking, our risk is much larger. We risk to lose everything we've been building for the past 60 years. And personally, I don't want to take that risk.
Thank you, Arnaldo. But it didn't stop. Didn't finish it. Now we're going to have an interactive session. And interactive session, I don't mean question and answers, but please not only ask questions, please share your experience, your ideas with us. But before starting this session, let me abuse being sitting here a little bit. Like add a few points to Arnaldo. First, you are very right for the European elections. Next year, this time, we may see a first in European political life, and two establishment parties, socialists and EPP, they can lose majority in the parliament. It will be a first, and that shows the danger you mentioned is real and close. Second is about the working of change and human brain. As you very rightly said and explained, with a move after a point, the change started to become exponential, but the human brain still works linear. We are not able to understand with our linear brains this exceptional change, unfortunately, and so that brings us to artificial intelligence and other things. I will not go into details. And finally, we also have to change our economic and social theories, because the present economic and social theories assume a rational human being, rational individual. At least even individuals does not act rational. That says big numbers of people act rationally. It is not. We saw it. Look at the United States. They elected Trump. Is it rational? No. That means we have to rewrite the theories. Neither individuals nor the big numbers are rational. So let's stop here and leave the floor for your questions and comments to the room. Who wants to start?
Good evening, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Mr. Abruzzini, thank you very much for this wonderful speech. We learned, at least I learned a lot of things from you, but I would like to exchange my experience about changes in the business, if you allow me. Changes started, in fact, about 30 years ago, mainly about 30 years ago with China. Before 30 years ago, we were talking about world economy being United States, Europe, and Japan. And if we make a calculation of those three countries or those three continents, we were talking about 750 million people, inhabitants. And then suddenly, well, at least for the youngsters among us, we had a country or a group called the BRICS countries, called China, Brazil, Russia, India. But I don't know why they forgot Turkey, because Turkey is also a developing country. Doesn't matter. But suddenly, from 750 million inhabitants, we came to almost 3.5 billion people. So the changes started on the world economy, not only on 700,000 people, but on 3.5 billion people. So we start a real change there. And that was, of course, quite difficult to accept to the Western countries to change those important world economy. So start everything from there, I think. Changes, I'm in industrial business, so I am producing industrial power transmission products, mainly on the offshore sector. One day in 1988, I wake up and I said to my lovely wife, I said, you know what, I'm going to China. Don't ask me why. And I went to China in 1988. It has taken me 3 days to reach my destination. Today, 10 hours. So from 72 hours to 10 hours, even 9 hours, it depends on the fly. But because I'm a Turkish origin Belgian citizen, I love Turkish Airlines, although I would like to fly with Air Italia, but they are not so convenient for me. It takes me indeed 10 to 12 hours to reach Shanghai. Changes, yes indeed, because the far, as we used to call far in those days, became today near. 10 hours versus to 72 hours. And I have been doing business in China because I have seen this in 1988. Maybe some of you were not born on that date. And I have been doing, and I'm still doing business with China since then. Changes, many of you, I'm sure, doesn't know what a TEDx is. Who knows? Tell me, who knows what is a TEDx?
We use one.
Gosh, 10% knows only TEDx. Well, changes start with the come of the technology, as Mr. Abruzzini just said, about this crazy thing, which I hate, but I can't do it anymore without it. 30 years ago, when I had my first TEDx, I was sending 10 messages. And believe me, I was one of the most happiest men or most happiest businessmen in the world because I have been able to send 10 TEDx's, 10 messages. Today, in one click, I've been able to send 100,000 messages, and I'm not happy. I still have that, I still don't have that feeling of satisfaction that I had 30 years ago when I was sending 10 emails, 10 TEDx's. So changes indeed. We have to adapt ourselves to the technology. In the business today versus a couple of years ago, it was not the competition. It was who you know and what you have on your on to sell. And of course, the price was not so important. Communication was so bad. Today, as I said, you can fly in 10 hours China, but those days you could not. There was no telexes, there was no faxes, there was no emails, there was no windows. Today, you at your home or in your bed with your laptop on your bed, and you can open the window, and you have open the window to the world, so you have everything on your 13-inch screen, which wasn't the case in those days. Adaptation, yes. You need to adapt yourself. You need to be open for changes, because a lot of companies were not open to changes and they went bankrupt. I'm not saying I'm a smart person. I'm Turkish, and I'm from Denizli, so that makes me maybe a better person that I've been successful in business. Because in 1988, when I went to China, I realized that China was indeed the future. And I opened my first company in China. I was a pioneer. And I did not open a factory. I leased a factory. In those days, you could lease a factory based on $30 per person that used to work the factory. You had to finance it. And I was a happy owner without spending $1, a happy owner of a factory with 800 people. But I had to pay them at the end of the month. Of course, they were my payroll. But I was happy to do that because I was still earning a lot of money with it. Changes, yes, because I have seen a couple of years later that leasing a factory was no longer profitable for me. So I opened my own company. I opened my own factory, producing my bearings in China and bringing them to Belgium. I'm still a Belgian-owned company, headquartered in Zaventem. And we've been working, and we are still working like this. But today, changes again. I come back to the roots. My roots being in Belgium. I'm going to close, most probably within the next couple of years, my Chinese factory and move it to Belgium. And why am I going to do this? Because today, still, one Belgian, mainly Belgian workers, is 2.4, or let me say, express myself differently, is 2.4 times more productive than any European average. Greece, Italy, Spain included, obviously. People then, 2.4 more productive than any other European countries, and 11 times more productive than a Chinese factory. So I employ here 1 person, and I employ in China 11 person. So because I have seen those changes, I'm going back to the roots. That's what I call them, back to the roots, to China. To Belgium. I would like to say, we've been talking about Nokia. Yes, indeed. If we are not aware why Nokia went bankrupt or broke his neck, one of the CEOs of the last CEO of Nokia said one day, I don't recall that we made any mistakes, but somehow we lost. And I think they had a mission, or they had a vision. Their vision and mission, obviously, both of them, was, everybody will know that, was connecting people. Have they connect people? No. They have not connected people on the cell phone. But iPhone did. iPhone has been able, although it was not their mission or vision, They have been able to connect with people, and that's why iPhone today has been successful in the sales and not Nokia. So I'm just giving some tips to the youngsters among us or businessmen. If they want to achieve, they have to have a clear mission and they have to have a clear vision. And if they have this vision and mission very clearly defined, they have to run for it to make their vision and mission come true. Well, that was my intermezzo, Mr. Rizoli. Thank you very much once again.
Questions, comments? Ishada was taking notes, maybe she got something to tell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abruzzini. This is the first time I listen to you, and I am very pleased to meet you. First, I would like to make one comment to complement the things that you said. Then I will have one specific question about special education, how the current education system can cope up with the change. First of all, I would like to really thanks. You really mentioned that the people who resist to change, in a way, they will pay the way. So you gave a Nokia example, or similar to Kodak. The more tragic is that they were aware of the Nokia was aware of the digital technology, but they were making good revenue, profits were high, they didn't go for it. Similar for Kodak, they were the first one even to find out the digital cameras, but if they are at the peak, if they are double-digit growing yearly, why they go, but at then we see the result. Thank you very much, that was a very good point. So, the second part is about the education system itself. If you look at the current education system, we put the people into the schools, into the classrooms, with some kind of one type of education. And I am one of the people, I am one of the person like believing that schools really kill creativity. There's one famous example that I quote from one of the TED talkers. He is giving an example. There's a little 6-year-old girl, she's drawing a picture. The teacher is asking, what are you drawing? The little kid said, I'm drawing God. The teacher was surprised, but nobody knows God. And the little kid says, they will know in a minute. So the thing is that school, around 5-6 years old, we are all very creative. But I really believe that the current education system is not coping up with the change. Or if you look at the current young generation, with the technology, with the parenting, with the environment, or many things, they are becoming disconnected. They are not becoming creative. On top of that, they are becoming not social. They are using all time staying together, but they don't talk, they don't understand, they don't show effort. They have almost zero patience. They don't even spend time to date or like spend time to find a girl. They go to an application, they like someone. You know about it. So the thing is that, what is your suggestion about the current education system and current young generation so that the change, they can adapt, they can cope up, and they can have a brighter future for us and for Europe? Thank you.
So one by one, we'll answer.
No, let's take a couple of more.
Mr. Abruzzini, first of all, grazie mille. Great.
I'm impressed. Maybe you can speak Italian. I can't speak it.
In Dennis, they can speak Italian.
First girlfriend was Italian.
Oh, that's the reason.
I was 7 years old. Her father used to work the same coal mine as my father worked, so we were neighbors. Un bacio.
Now, I think the Nokia example is very valid, but my point is, business somehow is matching, because they have to, in order to survive, they have to adapt these changes, but political environments, I can't see this adaptation like a business. So that is one of my frustrations. I fully agree what will be happened next year in May, because sudden example 2 years ago, which was my question actually, Mr. Trump was telling that it was
questions about us and telling something about it. Then questions.
Education is something that we really need to look very carefully about, because education is that process where we cultivate our next leaders, our next participants in society. So if we get wrong with that, we'll get the wrong product at the end. It is like in business. The production chain is wrong, the product doesn't come up as we wish. But if that is true, we need to have the right element of production in place. Now, I think that there are three elements that are not right in place today. The first element is a consideration about change. There are studies and statistics that say that 6 out of 10 pupils entering elementary school today will be performing a job that do not exist yet. So, if I have to create a production chain of a product that I don't know, how can I do it? So the traditional way of educating people doesn't apply any longer, because we don't know what we'll end up with. We need to apply the creativity principle also in education. And say, okay, if I don't know what those people will be doing, what do I teach them? And I think that there are two elements there that we could already abstract from a focus of the future that will help us navigate in waters that are unknown. The first one is ethics. Somebody says ethics? What it has to do with? Ethics and humanistic subjects. Because paradoxically today, if you look at the technological development, together with the new devices or new learning machines or artificial intelligence you were referring to before, we do have a huge element of ethics that comes into the game. And ethics, it is not a subject which is currently taught largely at school. Why ethics? The example of the self-driving car arriving to a crossroad with a pedestrian in the middle. What is the choice that that car will make? Crashing against the wall or running through the pedestrian? That is not the machine making the choice. This is the algorithm behind, written by somebody that will tell the machine what to do. And how do you make that choice? If you have no solid element of ethics in your hands. Cannot be just an engineer or a scrambled person on the computer making the choice. So the element of that I group in ethics are absolutely important. The second element is the impact of digital. We're not talking about sectorial element. Digital is pervasive in all our lives. Not only because of this, but even in agriculture, the impact of digitalization is enormous. Not only in IT and communication, which is obvious, but in all our life. I was mentioning before the health sector. It is unbelievable what is already happening. We don't have to wait years. If you go to the most advanced hospitals or clinics, the diagnosis of the doctors is not made by our old family doctor that would just tapping on our back and say, yeah, well, it might be that you have a cold. But they collect data of those symptoms from millions of similar cases and are able to tell you in a snapshot what are the chances of your survival or not. This is already happening. In courts, we were used to study at the university cases of judicial processes to understand how those cases have been solved. But for how good you were at the university, those that made law at university, you could study 10, 15, 20 cases. Now with the machine learning, they can go through thousands of cases, millions of cases, in a second, and then come up with the best solution for that case. Self-driving cars, they can collect information from the surrounding of where the car is located and making immediate decision of what is happening. And this is already there. Those that have bought recently a car with this advanced system of support or help to driving, self-driving car not there yet, support for driving, the collision prevention system brakes your car if conditions are so that you cannot even see them, but the car has it. So digital is something that is pervasive to our society. So the two elements that I would suggest to teach today at school are at the different grades, the ethical element and the digital element. But now we have a problem. Who will teach this to pupils? We have the same scarcity Trump has in the US to find Spanish speaker teachers. We don't have those teachers. We do have a major problem with the teachers or professors because they have been generated by a process in the past 20 years that have not put attention to those two elements. Now, we do not teach any coding at school, or largely, in some schools, yes. We do not teach any ethics, and the problem is we do not have the teachers who do this. And if you ask today a teacher, as I mentioned before, he would love to continue to teach exactly the same because he or she might have wrote a book on this 20 years ago and they continue to teach exactly the same. It has happened to me at the university. I had a professor that wrote a book, I don't know, 20, 30 years before, and he was still repeating the same lesson for 30 years. Now, there might be some good, consistency, good, all this is fine, but hold on a second. Maybe this is not everything. We need to find a way. So the two problems are, maybe we should better identify and focus on those elements that by a large percentage of possibilities will impact our life in future. And second, we need to review the way we select the teachers, which is the same problem, by the way, that we have in business. Because in business, who is recruiting people in business? HR. How HR works.
Like 20 years ago.
Exactly. So the point is that we continue to recruit people in our business based on an old model. And it doesn't work. So the way we are conducting even simple things that we say, okay, but No, this has nothing to do with the changes that guy is talking about. No, 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 no. Everything is different. But we need to make sure that the pupils or the new generation will grow bearing that in mind, which is not a fear. It's a view of reality. This might take a little bit longer, but I will try to summarize. The first, when you were speaking, I was thinking, Trump, well, he didn't arrive there by chance. He has been elected, meaning that the majority, however you can count them differently, but a large number of American citizens have voted for him. They wanted him there. And still, there is a large portion of American society that believe that they made a good choice. They like it. In Italy, we have Salvini and Di Maio, which are bizarre people, but they've been elected by my country. And their position today, according to polls, is even better than before. They are loved by a majority of the people. And those people, for those that maybe among us look at that from a different perspective, are quite weird, because they're doing strange things. While Europe, for instance, is insisting in maintaining the sanctions against Russia for certain reasons, Salvini is flying to Moscow and meeting Mr. Putin and saying, yeah, Europe is ready, but just make business with me, I can accept everything you do. While Trump is withdrawing the US from the Iranian nuclear deal, but then the American businesses coming to me saying, okay, can you bridge us with Iran, please, because we cannot go there directly, but through Europe, or we may go there. So, what can we do in this situation? Well, certainly, I doubt that we could defeat the entire American society or other countries, including UK. What they are doing actually is something that many among us believe being a mistake. But they're doing it. There is the sovereignty of the people of each country that decides for their future. The problem is that their future today, as you were saying, has an impact also on our future. Because what Trump and Xi Jinping will be doing next week in Buenos Aires, that we risk to have an impact in our life. So we are concerned. We cannot simply say today, as maybe some centuries ago, people was not even aware that it was a war some kilometers out of their own castle. Today, the castle is the planet. And the communication technology can make us aware immediately if somebody is shooting somebody else in a very far away country. So what Trump is doing with Xi Jinping in a few days will have an impact, negative or positive. Europe in this and EUROCHAMBRES, we are trying to produce some safeguard clauses to our members. We are and we remain convinced that in today's world, creating any kind of barriers, physical, regulatory, or conflictual, is a mistake. We are witnessing all together what is happening with UK, with Brexit, that despite the willingness of the British citizens to leave and depart from the EU, well, they're now realizing that to build the Mini Cooper of British origin, there are 10 times crossing the channel from Europe and UK. And therefore they say, oh, hold on a second, what will happen next once we would be out? Because those 10 times will not be so easy at that point. Or how many of our citizens are exchanging experiences, both European in UK and British in Europe, that will not be so easy afterwards. The connectivity of our societies has increased at the same pace of the connectivity that you were referring to of these things. Now we're all connected with one or the other part of the world, certainly. We tend to be connected with those that seems alike to us. If you look, just make an exercise. Take your contacts in your mobile phone or in your computer and look the country of origin of the majority of your contacts. Have you never tried to do that? You might have a lot of Chinese, but you might have an exception. Many of the Western countries related among themselves. So we related with Europeans, and then we related with the Americas, North and South Americas. Why? Because the flow of people went that way. We were moving from Europe to the US and to the Southern American countries. We do not have a majority of our contacts from Korea or China or Vietnam. But if you ask to an Australian, the picture is completely different. The building of networks pass also through a recognition of similarities that we might enjoy in networking with these people. Now, what you were saying, what Trump has to do in terms of networking with Xi Jinping or with the North Korean leader, very little. They do not even understand themselves. As we have difficulties, you might teach us some of this, to understand the Chinese, because they're different. They act differently. We don't understand so easily. But
You have to live.
yeah, you had to live, but Trump has not lived in China, to my understanding. So he doesn't understand Xi Jinping. But he doesn't even care less about this. So I mean, I cannot forecast the future. I'm not able to, it's out of my comfort zone. But certainly I know that those that will try to build walls or barriers have two impacts in our life. The first one is negative, because barriers do not compare with the history of this world. Second, they will not last for long, because they will be swept off themselves. And the history of China is very illustrative. Thanks to the mistakes made by leaders in China 2,000 years ago, we are not all Chinese today. China 2,000 years ago was ruling the world in terms of technology, in terms of cohesion of that society. Just consider these huge differences. Europe is made by an enormous number of little reigns with little emperors and kings that at a certain point came together in centuries, and now we have Europe. But the root of Europe is my little king, my little place where I can reign and be the emperor. Therefore, develop policies in Europe, it's very difficult. Why? Because the resilience to accept somebody else's suggestions, I'm the emperor of my king. Exactly, my home is my castle. So why somebody has to tell me what to do? Look, China. China is the exact opposite. This society, but you can tell me what you think about this. The society is an homogeneous society. And the governance of that society is completely different from the governance of our society. Therefore, implementing policies in China at the end is much easier. It goes through. What is the impact today of this? That in Europe we struggle. Since 30 years we have launched our process of the single market. 30 years. And we're not there yet. Our single market, it is not completed. Meaning that we still have barriers and obstacles to the completion of the single market. Why? Because those that should implement the single market, which namely are our member states, are not doing it. Why they're not doing it? Because they say, in my house, I'm the king. In China, it's a completely different picture. Look at the demographic challenges. In China, they have addressed the demographic challenge in a certain way, good or bad, but they did it. And they achieved what they wanted to achieve, good or bad. In Europe, we do not have a demographic policy. We can't. Why? Because nobody can tell the others how many kids he or she could have. It is an exception. Your president says also that you have to buy your treasury bond in Turkey. It is an exception. But the large majority can't. We do not have a demographic policy in Europe. And then we are complaining that we have a demographic issue. But we can't solve that with a policy. It doesn't work. So Mr. Trump has a major problem. His major problem is that whatever he will say to Xi Jinping will not have any impact on Xi Jinping itself. Why? Because Xi Jinping today has a much higher capacity to fight than Mr. Trump itself. And Trump knows this. If today there is a country that can, a country with 1,200,000,000 people, with a growth rate which is maybe not satisfactory for them, but is a kind of vision for us, with a demographic dynamic which is supporting the economic growth, with an education system which is producing every year a number of people able to enter in this new technological framework, which is impressive, and you want to fight against somebody like this, it will eat on your head in a very short time. So I do not think there will be any wise people that could suggest to Mr. Trump to fight. He has to show the muscles. This is his style. He does it. But our colleagues in the US Chamber of Commerce are producing and giving papers to the US administration very clearly saying, don't do this, because it would be like bombing your neighbor. He will react and you will be dead. And we are doing the same. There is no reason to believe that anyone could be so crazy to fight against somebody which is by far already today with the matrix we can use enormously most powerful than we all are collectively. It would be completely crazy. But we have to accept that we were before, just consider before the 1542, before the discovery of America, Europe was the leader of the world. Then we have declined, but not necessarily because we did wrong choices like Nokia, but because a competitor emerged. And if you have to share a cake, and you have all the cake in front of you, and somebody else is coming, well, the cake is shared. And then you say, oh, I'm losing part of my cake. Well, of course. And then the BRICS that you were mentioning before, they will take part of the cake. The problem is how this cake is growing. But what you have said is very right. The number of slides that we had to make of that cake is increasing more rapidly, or has increased more rapidly than the size of the cake itself. Therefore, it is obvious for everyone that knows a little bit of mathematics that we get less. But that's normal. That cannot be, oh God, what is happening? That's normal. So our potential goal should be to recalibrate the demography with growth. So the cake with the slice. But what is happening now? Potentially we have another bomb coming, which is Africa. If Africa will enter and will sit at the table pretending a slice of the cake, with the demography which is out of control in Africa, what we do? But I'm sure that even Mr. Trump has a very wise advisors to tell him that that is the reality. Forget about campaigning. That is the reality.
I want to challenge you on one point. You said it was not because of mistakes of Europe, but I think Europe made mistakes there. What made America today is the Second World War and the First and Second World War. If you didn't fight, then America wouldn't be the America of today, for sure. And China, United States made the dragon. We created it. In the early 80s, they invested heavily in China and thought China will stay forever as a cheap labor source. But they did not. They did not cheap labor. They were learning quickly and imitating, then creating. They didn't foresee it, and they created this dragon. So you cannot say Europe, it's not Europe's mistake or US mistake, or I don't know if we should call it mistake, but it played a role in creating today's China and US. Sorry.
I will answer you afterwards.
Okay. Let's take the question back.
Mr. Abruzzini, thank you very much for this lovely intervention. As a Turkish diplomat, I would like to ask, of course, about... As a Turkish diplomat, I would like to ask about Turkey-EU relations. Are you as optimistic as we Turks are for the accession, beginning with Schengen area? In two dimensions, I would like to ask this question. From the ethical point of view, you mentioned European values are in crisis and there are some problems regarding the basic values in Europe. So are our European colleagues are as ambitious as we are for defending these values, because if they say no to us, it will be contradictory, I think, to the European basic values. And from the businessman point of view, business person point of view, are you as optimistic as we Turks are? Thank you.
After all I have said, the risk of degradation of Europe, are you sure you still want to enter the European Union? You will enter a building in fire. I mean, no, I mean, but some years ago, I was, in a conference, and I was discussing about the accession, and at that time still potential accession of Turkey to the European Union. So from a pure statistical perspective, Europe would be much better off with Turkey. Just consider, we were discussing about demography. Well, statistically wise, if you integrate Turkey in Europe, we will take advantage of the composition of your society, which is still much different to the composition of our society. We are much aging society that you are. And because we know that consumption is driven by the young generation, the leaders of consumption are not the eldest people, but the youngest people, therefore that will produce a benefit in our society. Just numbers. Statistical numbers. The rate of growth that you are experiencing in Turkey is pretty good compared to the average of the countries in Europe. Therefore, we would be benefiting also of a dynamic of economic growth that we are not experiencing in Europe. Still numbers, but that would still support, that would be a merge of these elements for the benefit of all. What will you be gaining of this? That's a more tricky question. We, as collective European Union, including Turkey, will be certainly much better off. There is another element which is important, which is the geopolitical element. Geopolitical element meaning we all know that there are certain regions in the world that are more subject to destabilizing elements. And those regions, one of those regions in the world is close to you. If we will be able to attract you inside our bloc, that would mean that we'll be better equipped against issues of destabilization coming from that region of the world. I can continue. There is a lot of reasons why we should believe that integrating a larger region, including EU, current EU and Turkey, would be beneficial, certainly for the collectivity of the countries. So the question might be, what is happening? Why this is not happening? And I have my personal view on this. Fear. Fear is the key word for me in this relationship. Because you are powerful, yes you are. And in Europe, if you compare your power of fire against many of the European member states, you are much stronger. And therefore the fear is, if they come in, we risk to lose our comfortable place that we had today, and somebody else will come on the top. And that somebody else not necessarily respond to what we've been used to for the past 60 years, to have this kind of dialogue that sometimes is completely useless and inefficient, but we love it. Because you are a disruptive element. like in technology, in this exercise, we are Nokia, you are Apple. So from the business perspective and from societal perspective, yes, it would be a great advantage. But we still have an amount of fear that that would disrupt what we have today. And I'm not talking about religion. Somebody says about this. I'm talking about fear to lose what we consider being our position today. Values, I think that we do share a lot of values. I don't think that that is a problem at all. Already in Europe we have a diversity which is so wide that we cannot say, yeah, but they are different. But we already have so many differences that we cannot say, because different, what does that mean? Remember that the European disclaimer is differences are a value, are an asset. So, but when we talk about Turkey, differences are a problem. And this I think it brings me to the final point in this relationship. We do fully support not the membership, because in our constituency there are countries that still hesitate on this. But we fully support that we have to think differently. If we continue to insist on the same wording, and I'm talking about wording, that do not go anywhere. The modernization of the custom union, but of course we need it. We are still thinking as decades ago, and we were just saying that the world has changed. And we still apply rules that have been set, and they are not up to date. This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. The movement of people. Now, if you consider it is absolutely crazy what we did, we all did together. The deal to made between EU and Turkey to handle the refugees. But actually, what I say, to keep the refugees in Turkey against certain promises. We don't want them in Europe. Keep them. At the end of the day, the risk is that we will be on the losing side, because we will lose the dynamic that those people integrated in your society would bring to you.
There's no dynamic.
No, here there's no dynamic.
There's no dynamic.
But just imagine, and I was talking with some of you before, we feared to accept a certain number of refugees. Let's say all the refugees in Turkey will come to Europe, 3 million, roughly. 3 million out of 60 million that you are. That makes 5%.
No, we are 80 million.
80 million, I'm sorry, 80 million. 4%. In Europe, today, we are 500 million, roughly. You know how many refugees we have? 2 million. So, rational thinking, it is not there. Capacity to analyze data is not there. If we would have been an artificial intelligence or a machine learning, we would have taken a completely different decision. Because we cannot stop the development of our society because we fear to integrate people. Remember, Europe is the land of migrants. Europe has been created for this. And now we're talking about 2 million out of 500 million. And we shake our hands.
So this brings us back to question of ethics.
Exactly. Exactly. So the relationship, it is a relationship that there is no perspective that can give us a negative appraisal of that relationship. But still, our common European understanding is we fear to go ahead. Rationally wise, there is no reason at all. So we continue to support all the different steps. I mean, look at the visa issue. Okay. How can we justify that we have opened our borders to people coming from different corners of the world in a much easier way than we have it with you? It would mean to do exactly the same tomorrow with UK. Can you imagine? Because the business relationship that already exists between EU and UK somehow, not at the same intensity, but already existing between EU and Turkey. But with UK, no one is even thinking that tomorrow, well, probably somebody in Theresa May's government, but normal people do not believe that we could have a visa regime with UK. Even in the withdrawal agreement, this is very clear. So, okay, let's work to have a free flow of people. You put your conditions for migrants and not of European origin. But then with another airport on the other side, we do a completely different setting. But what is the reason of this? Well, my explanation is fear. There's no other explanation of that.
So then ethics is not so powerful as fear?
At all. And that is the problem of our leadership. We do not have the capacity to work against values or ethical principles that guide our society. We are much better off in defending our seat, and therefore, because I'm an elected person, I want to tell you what you want to hear, and you want to hear that you want to be secure and defended. Look at the motto of the Austrian presidency: a Europe that defends your interests, a Europe that defends your citizens. Defense. We are under attack. Somebody is fighting against us, and we need a defense force. In the proposal of the European Council for the Sunday meeting, there will be the defense of Europe, the defense policy. And tomorrow, the defense, the army of Europe. We are under attack. We feel to be under attack. We need to be defended. Our citizens are losing their fight, and therefore, this is what we're living in today. Which is,
You are a citizen candidate for Commission presidency. Someone like you. Hey, actually, according to
May I ask some questions as well?
Just a reminder. We have to finish the meeting at 9:30.
Yes.
So we have about 40, half an hour. Does anyone need something to drink, a coffee or something? Shall we take a 5-minute break, just without leaving the room? If anyone needs something, let's stop for 2-3 minutes. But
Only
5
5
minutes.
minutes.
But please don't
Maximum
go
5
out
minutes.
altogether. When we
Please.
come back to
And then we will ask Mr. Orenda.
And also, Yaşar Bey, I am expecting a question from you too. The founder and the president. Just 5 minutes break. Keep them short.
Yok
canım,
kelime için soruyorum. Niye ödenmedi mi? Yeni yolladım. Şey der gibi sen ödemeli faturayı. 5 dakika. Hayır şey diyor.
Nasılsınız? Hoş geldiniz.
They are generous questions.
We have 45 residents.
know what the president is going
Okay. So, after our Consul General's question, I understand that you personally support Turkey's adhesion to the European Union, but as your organization, how do they look to Turkey's adhesion to European Union?
Officially, we do not have a position on this because there is a conflictual vision among member states, not dissimilar from Europe, and therefore we had decided not to issue any position paper on this, neither positive nor negative. We avoid it. And our normal disclaimer is we are business representative. Therefore, we do advocate a major activity to relate the business communities of the two sides, that eventually could lead to an accession. But the accession is a political dossier. The business relationship is our betting matter. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm Orhan Erenberg from Tim Global Media. We're a publisher of industrial magazines in 5 languages, one of which is Italian, and they're all for the industry. Our operational headquarters is in Milano. So I think your analysis...
I'm from Rome, not from Milan.
From where? Roma. Roma la Bella. I think your analysis on Europe is really good and to the point. And even though we've been talking about Europe quite a lot, while you were talking about maybe your fears about the results of the May elections, I wrote down a few things. And I think, don't you think that the communications from the European bodies is extremely poor? Because, in fact, there's no communication whatsoever. If you look at when there are elections in countries, it's the countries themselves that organize the propaganda, or the, let's say, the politicians themselves. And nothing like that comes out of Europe itself. It's maybe the local MPs who are campaigning, but Europe as such does not campaign. So we never know what has been achieved, what was good, what was not. You know, I think that's one of the things. The other thing definitely is, like you said, it's the kings, the local kings, because that's one way of retaining power in your own country. And but isn't it a bit strange that the same people who actually sign the decrees, agree on the laws, are those who go back to their countries and criticize Europe for those decisions? So that should be made a bit clearer to the population as well, I think. And then I believe there's another issue, obviously, is that there's a big imbalance in Europe, because who is making the decisions in the end? It's Germany. And it's like an empire in the European Union. You talked about empires. If you looked at the history, you know, you have the Roman Empire, which crumbled, and all sorts of little nations were born. The Ottoman Empire, which was huge as well, crumbled, and nations were born. Isn't there a bit this fear also locally, and with you know, with the average person, to think, well, the EU is not really ruled by any of us, it's ruled by the powerful countries in Europe. And who is the powerful country? It's Germany, and to some extent France. So don't you think that this is one of the issues? And definitely I would say that the local politicians working on the fears of their population. I mean, you mentioned fears as far as Turkey is concerned, and I think that's also one thing that's been played, like in 2007 by Nicolas Sarkozy in France. I'm a French citizen as well as a Turkish citizen, so I know what I'm talking about. And President Erdogan's stance changed at that point in Turkey as well. And he started looking for alliances elsewhere, with Arab countries, recently with Russia. So I think that the more the EU waits, the more it's going to become a danger for Turkey and for Europe. So that's my first intervention. I don't know if you want to comment on that, and then I will have a second one. Do I go on? Okay. The second thing is about the state of the world today. It's very unstable. I don't think that it's been so unstable since just before the Second World War. Because there's a lot of different factors. There's huge unemployment, explosion of demographics in poor countries. The climate, I mean, whoever is denying climatic changes must be totally crazy, like Mr. Trump. And like I said, poverty and the speed of change, the speed of technology, creating a disconnect between, you know, those who are educated, those who are not, and those who use their smartphone, you know, like somebody who's addicted on drugs. And that makes them weaker, and that creates all sorts of, you know, younger people who will be tomorrow's unemployed. But beyond that, I think there's a major issue. And one of them, and that issue is that, say, from the 30s through the 60s, there was this industrialization that really helped the lower classes to become part of the middle class, to get education, to have a job, and you know, that created some sort of stability, especially after the Second World War. And then from the mid-70s through the 80s, there was you know, a lot of automation happening in factories, also the advent of the PC and so on. And there were a lot of jobs lost, and I don't think anybody can deny that. And nothing happened with those people who lost those jobs. That is, they did not find new jobs, because those jobs that they were doing disappeared from the face of the earth, or definitely from the face of Europe, maybe not the whole earth. So today we have artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence, I mean, believe it or not, within a few years it's going to replace accountants throughout the world. It's going to replace recruitment agencies, and it's already started to do that. And it's going to replace some general practitioners as well, and maybe lawyers, like you said, because it's really a very, very efficient tool. And it's easy, I think, for people, because people are lazy. They're in general, they're lazy. They have a tendency to be lazy. To rely on the AI and no longer to have the skills themselves. So I think there's a problem there. There's an educational problem as well. But with AI, the predictions are that within 20 years, there's going to be another 50% of jobs lost. What do we do with that?
I hope they will
Yeah, and
CEOs and representatives.
yeah, and finally, with the population growing, you know, 9.5 billion people. So, how do you see the future? You know, I didn't want to sound pessimistic, because I'm not, but I think these are the challenges that we're facing, and they're real challenges, and to deny them is what is dangerous, and that is what causes all those you know, populist currents and so on. I think things have to be stated like they are, and they have to be looked at, and solutions have to be found. Thank you.
I do believe that the future is bright. The future is absolutely going for a much better outlook than we could imagine today. This has been the same for the history of the human being. Actually, when we say that we don't know what kind of jobs 60% of pupils will do in 10 years, we are saying that in 10 years, we will look back at today and we will assess that we are living better at that time than we were living at today. If you take any single year in the history of the human being, and you make that exercise, you see that we are increasingly developing a much better standard of living than before. No matter wars, accidents, conflicts, pandemias, we are always living better. Why this? Because the human being is the only species on earth that is able to develop activities, tasks, products, services for its own use and for its own benefit. Why should that stop? Because Trump, or because the artificial intelligence, or because there is no reasons to believe that anything could stop that process. There are books, and I invite you to read some of those books, that elaborate on data about our standard of living. Just take, for instance, the big noise we have today on media about terrorism. We are all concerned about the terrorist attack here and there, up and down, whatever is happening. Of people shooting each other in theaters and cinema, in the streets, in colleges, and so forth. The number of people dying for these activities has dropped 95% in the past 50 years. Has dropped 95% in the past 50 years. What does that mean? That today, risk to die for those facts are almost inexistent, statistically wise. But we all make an enormous noise about this. But in reality, it is not happening. People dying in conflicts has been a fraction of what was only 50 or 60 years ago. A fraction. Even though we all are aware that there are a lot of conflicts up and running around the world. But the number of casualties is decreased in an enormous manner. And I can continue. The number of people dying for diseases is absolutely reduced. The number of people dying for pandemias, almost inexisting. The number of people educated at school, able to read, is enormously higher. The number of people suffering hungry and famine is absolutely reduced. The number of people which is vaccinated against diseases is enormously high. So yes, I'm an optimistic, and I think that we, in our genetic imprinting, we have the objective for a better life, and we are doing this. And there's no reason to believe that that will stop. Unemployment, yes, you are right. But just consider that in the year 541 after crisis, so 1,500 years ago, we suffered the largest by far problem on earth
related to climate change. Eruption in Iceland were so disruptive that covered the sun for months, and all crops and all activities based on agriculture at that time went bust, and then people started dying at a pace which is unimaginable today. Can you compare those kind of things with the discussion about climate change we have today? Certainly, that does not mean that we have nothing to do. There is a lot to do, yes. But that lot to do is always going for the best, not for the worst. Those that say and tell me, oh, you know, it's so bad because we were living so nicely years ago and now the future is so dark, forget it. This is not true. This is not based on facts. This is based on perception of the reality, which is not based on data. If you analyze the data, they tell you a completely different story. By the way, you are representative of a media. The role played by the media of this, it is something that we should question. How many of your colleagues report opinions which are not necessarily based on data? I give you one example. There is one very famous publication, daily news in Brussels. And then I met with the editor, and I said, well, I mean, how do you strive for survival, because it's a competition within different media and so forth. And he said, well, yes, it is a business, of course, but, you know, we are surviving. I said, okay, but how do you do? Well, you know, we survive, we have paper and digital media, we survive on number of copies and clicks. And how do you, market your products? He said, well, we are in business. Being in business, it means that we report the news in a way, in a time where we know our customers are most attracted by those news. Hold on a second. I was very naive, and I said, I thought that you were reporting the facts as they are. Oh no, that would not make our business flourishing. Our business is to report the time and the news in a way where customers will be more attracted. What does that mean? To which extent we can stress that theoretical approach to twist the news up to a point where the news that we are reporting is not the real news any longer. And that is what influences people. If we are telling people that we are living much worse than before, this is a fake news. This is not true. But if you read many of your colleagues' publications, this is what you read. If you listen to the news, as a communicator, my press officer is saying, oh, don't say nice things. I said, why not? Because that will not be reported. If you are critical, polemic, you say the worst of ever, then you get the news. Hold on a second, this is not a world I want to live in, where everybody to get visibility has to say the worst things ever. We are not living in a worse world than before. But you have one point that I fully agree with, which is the democratic gap we have in Europe. But let's make an example of a business. Those that are familiar with this is the multi-level marketing. So that you have a chain of actors or players or people that in a chain promote a product, a service, whatever it is. But the first of the chain never has a contact with the last of the chain. This is why it's called multi-level marketing, because it goes from one level to the other one. There are famous brands that are doing this. Good. Europe is very similar. We are a multi-level marketing organization. The people in Brussels do not have access to the citizens in the member states. That is the level where the regional or local or national entities have access to. So the responsibility of the product that goes from Brussels down to the corner of Europe, it is a shared responsibility by every actor which is in the chain. This is not happening. Because it's happening what you are saying. If the product is good, I say that this is mine. If the product is bad, I say that this is a Brussels. But Brussels is a portion of the chain. Everyone has a notion of how business works, can understand that this is a fake news as well. But this is what is happening, and this is what the communication is moving. But this is not a fault of Brussels. This is fault of the intermediary channels in the middle, the other levels. In my organization, and Haluk knows it pretty well, I cannot contact every business in Europe. Still, I pretend that at EUROCHAMBRES we have 20 million members. I cannot contact all of them. And therefore we have a shared responsibilities. The local chambers of commerce have the responsibility to contact and pass the message to their own members. But they cannot come back to me at a certain point in time and say, oh, well done, you're not communicating to my members. Forget it, this is your responsibility. But being accountable in this world is the last thing that people want to do. Because that would mean taking the responsibility to go to your members in saying something that might not be so nice to them. And you don't want to do it. And therefore you blame somebody else. In a business, you will be out. At least in my business, you will be out.
Actually, declared time is over. 9:30. We started 5 or 10 minutes late. If there is one short question I can take, otherwise, let's finish. We already asked the question. Okay.
Est-ce que je réponds en français ou
Okay. This is the last question.
The question is, I mark here, wait a second, I did that, I take it back.
Is EU an obstacle, or is EU a beneficial tool for the European citizens and for the relationship with the rest of the world? Can we phrase it like this?
Pour le changement.
For the, yes. Confronted with the changes that we have today. Well, it's a very intriguing question, actually. There is a survey that has been published yesterday by Friends of Europe, asking a certain number of European citizens if they could consider that living without the EU will be more beneficial than living within the EU. Well, I'm sorry to tell you that the majority, so 52% of the surveyed people answer was, we can consider that living without the EU would be better off for us. This is a major problem related to the communication element, to the democratic gap, and it poses risk for the election next year. Because if you have in business somebody that says, well, your product, just keep it, I don't want it. Because if I take your product, I would be worse than before. But if you are in business, if your product is not accepted as you wish from the market, what do you do? You try to adapt your product to the market. Therefore, yes, we need to change the way the European Union works. Because otherwise, the risk is that we are not adapted any longer to the needs of the market. Trade is a very good example. Trade relationship between EU member states and the rest of the world were based, before the Lisbon Treaty, on a national capacity to strike deals with third countries. Every European member state had a certain number of bilateral trade agreements with third countries, up to 182 in Germany, and so forth. Then a decision was taken, well, maybe if we pool together resources, and we negotiate as one, we can get some better results. And then the competence of negotiating trade agreement swept from member states to the EU level. We have forgot something. We have forgot to take out the last tool member states had in their hands to refuse what had been negotiated by the EU level, the ratification process. And then what you see in Belgium, and you know this is history by now, a portion of Belgium has posed many problems for the ratification of a huge deal of Europe with Canada. But certainly the conditions negotiated by the entire European Union with a single country were much better off than any condition that could be negotiated by a single country. But the problem is, if we recognize that this is the element of benefit of Europe, we need to work coherently that way. Look at the labor market. If you analyze the mismatching of skills still existing in the European labor market, and you try to move those mismatching around Europe, you see that magically at a certain point everyone will find his job. Because it is true that I have a request of plumbers in Poland, that is, sounds familiar, and I have some plumbers in France, but I don't match. But if I consider Europe as a single area of the labor market, they will magically match. This is what is happening in the US. In the US, you have a much more fluid labor market because there are no the same barriers we have in Europe. When I landed in Brussels almost 20 years ago, I was already with a certain experience in managing companies and so forth. And then I arrived in Brussels, and for reasons related to the international organization I'm managing now, I was required to register to the Tribunal de Commerce, to the ministry. And I went there and they said, oh yes, Mr. Abruzzini, fine, very good, congratulations, so you had to sit for an exam. I said, what? An exam of what? Yeah, because we need to check if you are up to managing that organization. You had to check if I'm able to, and who are you? I'm the functionary, the civil servant of the ministry, that, you know, because we do not recognize your grade and your diploma in Belgium. I refused to sit for the exam. I said, you must be crazy. I had created X number of business. I managed so many other business and organizations. I have that experience which overcome your experience, and you want to check if I'm able to do that? I've been elected by at that time 33 president of chambers of commerce around Europe, validated by the member states, and you had to check if I'm able to. Were you able? I don't know, ask my members. That is Europe. Europe, slowly, is creating an area where changes can occur in a larger dimension and we can absorb shocks. Look how Europe has managed the crisis and the following problem of Greece. If Greece was alone at that time, I don't know what would have happened to Greece. Europe has been able to absorb the shock. And yesterday, Pierre Moscovici, that I was with him yesterday, he declared possible for Greece to reinstall the full pensions amount to those that have been capped, the pensions in Greece. That is Europe. That is the Europe that cares about citizens. That is the value of an approach which is larger than our own castle. Because we still come from there. We come from the little castle, from the little village. And we still bear in our genetic imprinting that, well, at the end of the day, you know, if I'm alone, who cares? I'm better off. Today, this is not true. We need to change the paradigm. So, Europe has a value, and Europe has a value under what condition? That the member states understand that value. What is the major obstacle we have in the European Union to fulfill the expectations of our citizens? You will laugh now, I'm sure. The member states. The member states are those, just look at the resolution of the Council. The member states are the single larger obstacle to the construction of a European Union that will care about its own citizens. Because they create rigidity in the picture. And the more rigidity you create in an area that pretend to act homogeneously, the more difficult that will become. If you eliminate those rigidity, the space will become fluid, and then we could act as China is acting. They do not have member states. How easier is their life? Now, don't quote me, please. The member states should disappear. But theoretically, the rigidity made by those elements are the rigidity that create the difficulties in Europe. Take out those rigidity and you will see the benefit that the Europe will create in a changing environment. That is our defense for the future, not the army. Forget about the army. In today's life, an army will cost a lot, but will not defend you.
Close the session, but may I ask you to stay 2 more minutes? Melih can present souvenir for tonight.
Mr. Abruzzini,
I make my game tonight, see that?
Mr. Abruzzini, thank you very much for all the insight that we have taken from you tonight. It was really a pleasure listening to you. I learned a lot myself, and I enjoyed a lot your speech. So thank you very much. Thanks a lot for being with us tonight.
Sen gel başkanım sen de. Buradaki demiştiniz bana kriket. Oraya mı getirdin? Burada. Merkezi ofise çok yakın.
Just before you go, I would like to thank also Beyhan, who helped a lot for happening of this tonight, and also Haluk for giving us this room and all the rest.
Bakıyorsunuz efendim.